It's easier to say, oh, you know, we're gonna show everybody that we know this league is good with or without Caitlin Clark. We're gonna prove it. But once you talk to your owner buddies and they say, look how much we made. I mean, Indiana Fever came to town. Look how much we're making, right? Once Renee Montgomery and Sheila Johnson talk to the owner of the Las Vegas Aces, talk to the owner of the Chicago Sky, and they say, hey, what was that gate looking like? Oh, damn. That's a lot of money. Indiana had 9 road games moved to larger arenas last year, but just 4 so far for 2026. WNBA teams are moving more games to different arenas this upcoming season, but Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever have significantly fewer of those games. The WNBA's regular season schedule announced Wednesday, including 19 games moved to different arenas, up from
The numbers just dropped, and they tell a story the WNBA doesn't want you to see. While league executives are out here talking about growth and expansion, they just quietly cut Caitlin Clark's big arena road games from 9 down to 4. At the same time, the total number of arena moves across the league went from 15 up to 19. Let that sink in for a second. They're expanding the strategy everywhere except where it actually works. That's not logistics. That's not caution. That's a coordinated decision, and the people making it have names, faces, and very specific reasons for wanting to prove the WNBA doesn't need Caitlin Clark. Here's what we're dealing with. The 2026 schedule just came out, and buried in the details is a pattern that's impossible to ignore. Last season, when the Fever were on the road, teams scrambled to move games into NBA-sized arenas because the demand was overwhelming. Connecticut moved a game. Atlanta moved a game. Washington moved a game. Standard WNBA venues couldn't handle the crowds that showed up when Caitlin Clark came to town. The revenue was undeniable. The attendance records speak for themselves. Indiana averaged over 15,000 fans on the road, nearly 4,000 more than any other team, and that's with Clark playing in only 3 of those upgraded games before her injury. So if the formula worked, if the money was there, if the fans proved they'd show up in massive numbers, why would you pull back? Why would you cut those opportunities by more than half while simultaneously increasing arena moves for other matchups? If you believe the story behind the story matters, hit that like button right now. It tells us we're on the right track. And trust me, this one goes deeper than the schedule release wants you to think. Let's start with the official explanation, because it's everywhere. The league says it's about caution. They'll point to Caitlin Clark's groin injury last July and frame the smaller venue commitments as responsible planning. She got hurt during that Connecticut game at TD Garden, missed the rest of the season, and now teams are supposedly hesitant to lock in big arenas without knowing if she'll be available. On the surface, that sounds reasonable, but the real-world test already happened. When her availability changed mid-season, the crowds didn't disappear. The Fever still drew, the game still sold, the demand was still there. So if the injury excuse held water, you'd expect a modest pullback, maybe a slight adjustment, not a 55% reduction in moved games while the rest of the league expands. And that's where this stops being about logistics and starts being about something else entirely, because if you look at who's making these decisions, the names become extremely relevant. Renee Montgomery is part owner of the Atlanta Dream. Last season, Atlanta moved 1 Fever game into State Farm Arena. This year, 0. Sheila Johnson is part owner of the Washington Mystics. Same pattern. 1 game moved last year, nothing this season, and Sheila Johnson isn't just any owner. She's the same executive who publicly criticized Time magazine for naming Caitlin Clark the Athlete of the Year, arguing the recognition should have gone to the entire league instead. That wasn't a casual comment. That was a statement about how she believes the narrative should be framed.
The Washington Mystics, Connecticut Sun, and Atlanta Dream each moved 1 game against Indiana last year, but none for the upcoming season. The New York Liberty, Portland Fire, Mercury, Valkyries, and Minnesota Lynx are already in NBA arenas, removing any need to move games for bigger crowds. Is part of this due to injuries? Well, they would like you to believe that, I think. They would like you to believe, oh, well, you know, she got injured last year. We don't want to move. We don't want to commit to a bigger arena. God forbid, you have names like Renee Montgomery, part owner of the Atlanta Dream. Names like Sheila Johnson, part owner of the Washington Mystics. Sheila Johnson, the same person who threw a fit that Caitlin Clark was named Time Magazine's Woman Athlete of the Year. And she said, why give it to Caitlin Clark? Let's give it to the whole entire league. If you ask me, this is a subtle play from folks like Sheila Johnson and Renee Montgomery. Because at the end of the season, they decreased the amount of fever games that have been moved to bigger arenas. Yet in totality, they increased the league from 15 games to 19 games.
Now look at what they're doing with the schedule. Connecticut took a fever game to TD Garden last year. This season, nothing comparable is on the calendar. If the league truly believed Indiana was the safest bet for demand, there would be at least one marquee game still shifted to a bigger venue. Instead, it's a quiet retreat. And it's not limited to one or two teams. Chicago and Dallas each had 2 games moved to larger venues last season. This year, each gets one. The pattern isn't random, it's deliberate. But here's the part that makes the whole thing impossible to dismiss. While fever-related arena moves drop from 9 to 4, the total number of league-wide moves rises from 15 to 19. Toronto's expansion team alone has 5 games shifted across different venues, including dates in Montreal and Vancouver. That tells you the league is absolutely willing to rearrange buildings when it wants to maximize attention and crowd size. The tactic isn't being abandoned, it's being selectively applied. And the one team that generated the most reliable road demand is the one getting cut out of the equation. So what's really happening here? You're looking at a calculated effort to reshape the narrative. The message from ownership isn't subtle. They want to prove the WNBA's growth isn't dependent on one player. They want to demonstrate that the league can sustain momentum without Caitlin Clark as the weekly centerpiece. And on some level, that's a fair goal. No league wants to be defined entirely by a single name. But there's a difference between building long-term stability and actively suppressing your most profitable asset to make a point. Because let's be clear about what's at stake here. Arena moves aren't just about optics. They're about revenue, premium seats, luxury suites, sponsorship packages, local partner activations. The difference between a 7,000-seat venue and a 20,000-seat venue isn't philosophical. It's operational. It's immediate money. And when you choose the smaller building, you're not just passing on ticket sales. You're passing on everything that comes with filling a major arena. Corporate buy-ins disappear. National attention shifts elsewhere. The kind of electricity that follows a fever game into any city gets muted before it even starts. Now, many of you have been saying this for weeks, and you were on to something. The setup for this season looks less like growth strategy and more like a live experiment with the league's most valuable draw. If early attendance and viewership hold without Clark dominating the spotlight, the league will call it validation. They'll claim it proves the product has reached stability, that the baseline audience is finally strong enough to stand on its own. But if the numbers fall, the messaging options are already built in. They'll point to CBA uncertainty, external noise, timing issues, and then quietly make midstream adjustments that restore the most profitable matchups to the biggest venues. That's the hedge. The league is trying to prove it never needed Clark to begin with, while keeping her as the emergency lever if the experiment starts to fail. And the people driving this strategy have already shown their cards. Renee Montgomery and Sheila Johnson aren't making these decisions in a vacuum. They're part of ownership groups that influence how the league presents itself. And their public comments reveal exactly how they want the story told. Johnson's pushback on individual recognition wasn't about fairness. It was about control. It was about ensuring the narrative stays centered on collective achievement rather than singular impact, even when the singular impact is the reason arenas are selling out. So let's connect the dots. You've got ownership groups led by figures who are ideologically opposed to celebrating one star. You've got a schedule that deliberately reduces the most profitable road matchups while expanding the strategy elsewhere. You've got an official explanation that doesn't match the real-world evidence. And you've got a league that's gambling its most successful season could have happened without its biggest draw. just to prove a point. Here's what that gamble looks like in practice. The 4 big venue Fever games they actually kept are all scheduled well past the opening stretch. July 5th against Las Vegas, August 8th against Chicago, August 18th against Toronto, August 20th against Dallas. Every single one lands after the early season energy has peaked, after the cameras have moved on, after the initial frenzy cools. Last year, the league stacked arena upgrades near the front of the calendar when attention on Caitlin Clark was at maximum intensity. This year, the approach is flipped. Generate the early narrative in smaller buildings first, then roll out the larger arenas later when attention has to be reignited on purpose. If you're starting to see the pattern here, drop a comment below and tell us what you think is really driving this decision. Is this smart long-term planning or a costly mistake dressed up as strategy? Because the league is about to find out which one it is, and the answer won't come from press releases. It'll come from the numbers. Reading between the lines reveals something even more calculated. The league isn't just pulling back on Fever arena moves, they're timing the reduction to coincide with an expansion narrative that gives them cover. Toronto's rollout, with 5 games shifted into alternate venues, lets the league point to geographic growth and claim the strategy is about reaching new markets rather than feeding one storyline. That might be partially true, but it doesn't answer the central question that actually matters for the business. Was last season a one-time spike driven by the Clark effect that will naturally cool off? Or did she create a durable audience that stays engaged even when she's not the centerpiece every week? This season is designed to answer that question, but it's also designed to be explained away if the answer isn't flattering. If early attendance and viewership hold, the league will call it validation and treat it as proof the product has reached true stability. But if the numbers fall, they can point to CBA uncertainty, to timing, to external noise, and then quietly restore the most profitable matchups to bigger venues mid-season. Watch what happens in late February and March. Watch who suddenly finds a path to a larger building. Watch how quickly practicality overrides principle when the difference between last year's receipts and this year's projections becomes impossible to spin. Because here's the reality that no amount of messaging can change. Owners can champion the idea that the league's rise is bigger than any one player, and they can mean it sincerely. But when the decision is between a 7,000-seat gate and a 20,000-seat gate, the conversation stops being philosophical. It becomes operational. Those aren't abstract concepts. They're immediate dollars that show up on financial reports, in sponsorship renewals, and in the way ownership groups start making decisions that contradict the league's public messaging. That's why the contradiction is so glaring. The same people who are publicly pushing a league-over-player narrative are the ones who privately celebrated when Indiana came to town last season and the revenue spiked. Renee Montgomery can talk about collective recognition all she wants, but when the Atlanta Dream moved that Fever game into State Farm Arena, the gate receipts told a very different story. Sheila Johnson can criticize individual accolades, but when Washington shifted a game to accommodate Clark-driven demand, the Mystics weren't complaining about the box office results.
4 times this season. You see how massive the season was? You see how much of a success it was this year? And we only had Caitlin Clark. See, we don't really need her. I told you guys we were going to do this without her. Interesting. The decrease in moved Fever games comes after Caitlin Clark played in just 13 games last season. Clark appeared in just 3 of the 9 moved road games, including July 15th against the Connecticut Sun at TD Garden. Clark injured her groin in the 4th quarter of that game and missed the remainder of the season. The Fever remained the league's biggest attendance draw last year, averaging 15,884 fans. If I'm an owner of an NBA arena, if I'm in charge of selecting what events gets put in these arenas, well, without a CBA deal reached, why would I want to start already Xing out dates with potential WNBA games when I can keep those dates open for when a Jonas Brothers come to town, when a Taylor Swift comes to town, when a Luke Bryan or whoever come to town? Why would I start Xing out these dates? I wouldn't. It's not smart. I want to keep those dates open as long as I possibly.
And that's the other angle that makes this even more complicated. NBA arena owners aren't sitting around waiting to commit premium dates to WNBA games when they don't have a finalized CBA deal to work with. Why would they block out high-value calendar slots for a league that's still negotiating its collective bargaining agreement when they could keep those dates open for acts that guarantee sold-out crowds? Taylor Swift, Jonas Brothers, major concerts and events that don't come with scheduling uncertainty. From a venue management perspective, it's not smart business to commit early when you can wait and see how demand actually develops. But that cuts both ways. If the WNBA wants to prove it can sustain momentum without relying on Clark, it's choosing the absolute worst time to run that experiment. You're asking NBA arena owners to take a risk on smaller markets and less proven draws while your most reliable attendance magnet is being deliberately held back. That's not confidence in the product. That's ideology overriding business sense, and it creates a scenario where everyone loses. Fans who want a realistic chance to see Caitlin Clark in person get fewer opportunities. Teams that could maximize revenue by upgrading buildings are asked to accept smaller gates early aspas, which is another way of saying they're being asked to leave money on the table. And the league puts itself in a position where softening numbers become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if you structure the schedule to minimize Clark's early season impact and the attendance dips as a result, you can't then turn around and claim that proves the league doesn't need her. All you've proven is that suppressing your most profitable asset produces predictable consequences. The market already answered whether the Clark-driven surge is real. Attendance patterns and broadcast numbers made that abundantly clear. The real question is what the league chooses to do with that reality. Does it fully lean in and treat the biggest draw like the biggest draw, or does it ration those moments to protect a broader narrative? Right now, the strategy looks like a careful hedged bet. The growth is not dependent on one player, while still reserving just enough Indiana games in upgraded venues to collect some of the upside. This cautious middle approach helps almost no one, and it sets up a season where the results will be analyzed through whatever lens supports the predetermined conclusion. If things go well, it's validation. If things go poorly, it's external factors. Either way, the league has built in enough explanatory cover to avoid accountability for the choices being made right now. And the most revealing part, you won't need a press release to know which direction the league is heading. You'll see it in the late venue swaps. You'll see it in the suddenly available NBA arenas. You'll see it in the time slots that get quietly upgraded. Because teams don't do those things to make a statement. They do them when they realize the statement is costing them money. That's why the next few weeks and months matter more than any debate happening on television. The schedule will tell you the truth. If early numbers hold, they'll claim victory. If the numbers dip, watch how fast the caution disappears and how fast the fever become premium inventory again. So here we are, looking at a league that's attempting something ambitious. It wants to prove it can stand on its own, that it can maintain record momentum without leaning on one superstar as the focal point every single week. If that works, it's a genuine statement about the product's stability. It means the WNBA finally has a true baseline audience. Not just a moment tied to one phenomenon, but if it doesn't work, there's no speech that covers the gap between those revenue tiers. There's no talking point that replaces the electricity that follows a fever game into any city. And in professional sports, ideology lasts right up until it becomes expensive. Then, reality takes over, and the people making these decisions have to answer for them. The setup is clear. The motivations are obvious. The names behind the strategy are on record, and the outcome will reveal what the league actually believes versus what it says. Until then, we're watching a calculated gamble play out in real time, with Caitlin Clark's drawing power being deliberately minimized to prove a point that may or may not hold up when the receipts start coming in. If you want the real story before the headlines catch up, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we're tracking every move, every quiet schedule change, and every midstream adjustment when the numbers force their hand. Drop a comment and tell us what you think happens when early attendance doesn't match last year's records. Does the league stick with the plan or pivot back to what actually works? We'll be here covering every angle they won't show you. Until next time, stay locked in.